Naperville, Illinois. Part 2, Kirk, you ready to go?
I am.
So I was born, and I had gymnastics as an option pretty early on. We were really into tumbling back in the old days, and I imagine my father's and grandfather's generation even more so. They had less equipment many times, so tumbling is something one could do with one's own body. When you were a kid, did your parents tell you, or did you realize that you had some natural ability in using your body in such ways?
Well, a little bit. I was very, very small. I mean, as a high school freshman, I was 4'8", 100. I was 4'8" and 78 pounds. So I looked like I was in 5th grade. And that's kind of been my life. I was always very, very small, but very, very strong for my weight. I didn't get involved in gymnastics until high school, which is very strange based on the level that I competed at, especially in that sport. But that's my only – I did have a little bit in junior high in gym class, but that was pretty much it. I think when I was very young, my dad had me enrolled in a gymnastics class for maybe a couple of weeks, but that was it. So
had you been born on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, do you think there was some athletic ability that the scouts from the Soviet Union would have found, and when they came to watch you doing anything, that they would have grabbed you up and put you in a retreat for these kids pursuing greatness?
I don't really know. It's hard for me to answer that. All I can say is that I was small and very strong for my size, which tends to lean toward that sport. So, wrestling too. Actually, I was a wrestler going into high school. I was not a gymnast. I wrestled more in elementary school and junior high than I did actually gymnastics. And that was really what I was going through, but a coach changed my mind freshman year.
Were you good at the Granby role in wrestling?
Well, I wasn't that involved in wrestling, so now you're beyond my ability level. I had a good half Nelson, and I could do a roll, from that position in what's the down position called in wrestling? I can't remember now. Just down position?
Yeah, I think it's called down position, wrestler's position.
Pretty easy, but, it was not really on a competitive level, more gym class type stuff.
Got it. And tell us how you got picked up and convinced by the coach that gymnastics would be something for you to try.
Well, I was walking across right before actually tryouts. It was after getting close to the end of the football season. I remember walking across the gym floor, and freshman coach actually in gymnastics, put his arm around me and pointed to a state championship banner and said, "You could be that someday." And that's all it took. I didn't understand what that meant. Actually, for the first 3 years of high school, I was really not very good. But that gets into a whole other sport.
You said the first 3 years of your gymnastics, you weren't very good?
Well, okay, so 14 is freshman year, 15 is sophomore year, and 16 is junior year. So I was pretty much as an athlete like everybody else. I sport 3 months. I thought it was fun to do, worked hard during the season. But, there wasn't a lot of goals or focus, just do it and look at the kids that were seniors and try to emulate what they were doing and so on and so forth. It was toward the end of my junior year that I saw an athlete compete on the still rings, which was my event. That's the one I was most passionate about. And I remember sitting in the stands watching him. And looking back, he was probably one of the better ringmen in the nation at that age. He was second or first in the state of Illinois that year. I had no idea of any of this. I just watched him at the time, and I remember blurting out in the stands, "Oh, I'm going to be that good." And I remember the athletes on my team looking at me kind of strangely because, on my best day on that event, I was below average. I was competing third, and in gymnastics, I usually put the last guy up first. So there was one guy, another guy, and then me, and I was a junior already. And I was in the worst team in conference. No one knew my name. I was never in the newspaper. It was a joke that come on. So that's kind of how that started. And then at the end of the season, which is only about a week later, our coach gave us goal sheets. And on that goal sheet, and I have to kind of smile because I'm not sure I would have dealt with this any differently thinking about it from my coach's perspective at the time looking back. But I put down, I want to score in the 9s. I think I got a 6 once before this, my junior year. I was in the 5s most of the time. I want to score in the 9s. I wanted to win a state championship, and I wanted a fluoride scholarship to compete Division I in college. Oh, my gosh. I didn't even know who I was, let alone – it was just looking at it, it would look ridiculous to most people. So I went into his office, into that meeting, and the meeting was about a half hour, and I'd say 99% of it was from the perspective, look, Kirk, you're biting off more than you can chew. There are athletes that have been downstate for the last 3 years. You haven't even been out of the conference meet. It was kind of that, you let's get something more realistic. So at that time, I'm basically looking back at it, getting aggravated because I would have none of that. So I left his office very motivated, but really not understanding what that was going to take.
Was this the same coach who encouraged you to try it?
No, that was the varsity. That was the freshman coach. It was the varsity coach because at junior year I was on the varsity, but on a very weak team. And again, if I was in his shoes, I'm not sure how I would have handled that either. It was just kind of a ridiculous pie in the sky type of a thing. So when you go through that, and you go through that experience, those 11 months, and see the ups and downs of what it takes and the dedication and commitment. And I mean, it's a life-changing experience. The foundations from the rest of my life and everything that happened in college, any award I ever won, or anything I was honored with, those foundations were built in those 11 months for the whole rest of my life, even raising my kids.
Wow. So what do you think the internal motivation was? Just a big can-do attitude for a small fry at your high school?
I would say a lot of people would say that. Yeah, I was picked on a lot as a kid, and I tended to stand up for myself. I wasn't one of those that would hide in a corner. And so it developed a lot of inner will for me. Again, inner will, and then staring that and actually going through that. I mean, I really did not understand what I was asking myself to do, but I just would not give up. I refused to give up. And my father was a big influence probably halfway through the struggle, because I remember sitting and having a conversation, and this is in my book. I actually detail my story at the end of my book. I go through the mental pieces in the beginning and then how it applies, and then I actually detail my story. And in there, I talk about my father and I sitting at a table and saying to him, my coach was right. This is ridiculous. This is impossible. And he listened to me. And his comment to me struck me. I remember finishing, and I was in tears. And he said, I believe you can do anything you put your mind to, but you have to believe it. And that was it. From that day forward, I just continued, and let's see where I ended up. So that's kind of how I took that the rest of the way.
Fascinating. And so you at age 15, you're a person who's not excelling in that. Was there anything in your life that you think you were excelling in at the time?
Yeah, doing my hair right, making sure I had the right clothes everybody was wearing. I was no different than any other kid, too concerned about my appearance. Will these plaid pants look good? When's the next dance?
Yeah.
Those types of things. And it's so weird because all of a sudden, like in moments, I'm talking about that moment on the bleachers and then that meeting, there's a focus, just a narrow focus of what I wanted, what I really want. That changed everything.
So there you were as a kid. You had, did the coach come around when you started to improve and say, hey, maybe, something like that?
Well, that's an interesting question because he didn't see me. I was kind of on my own. I joined a gymnastics club so I could train in the off season. I went to camp, which for 2 weeks, a very good camp. A lot of the Division I college gymnasts were there. That was in August after that season. Our season ended in maybe January, February. So in August. So I did that. I had done it the summer before, but I only did it as a 1 week camp and just something to do. This time I went with a purpose. So when I got back during tryouts and he had seen what had happened to me in 6 months, everything changed. I still had a long way to go, but I had come so far.
Wow. So take us through some of the times where you started to believe in yourself and maybe you got some compliments, kudos, other people believing in you, and how you went from someone with that willpower to being a world-class athlete.
Well, the high school state championship was, and again, I detail this in Becoming a True Champion pretty thoroughly, but going through that season and the ups and downs, gymnastics is a very subjective sport, different than a track where the winner is the one who crosses the line first. You have a judge who gives you points based on rules. And sometimes when it's subjective like that, having name recognition makes a difference. So going through trying to build that in 1 year and the ups and downs, and then winning the state championship, which is what ended up happening. And actually the 3 goals that I put on that paper became a reality for me.
That was senior year?
Yeah, that was the end of my junior year through to my senior year. So I was recruited by Nebraska and then several other schools, by Northern Illinois. And okay, so this is an interesting piece. So
before the state championship or after you won, they all wanted?
Nobody knew me until the end of the year. So there was nothing there until the end, nothing. And
so they're firing, you're graduated and then they're firing off letters to you after you're already done with high school?
Actually, it was in February. I finished the state series. So there's the spring season gymnastics. Now is in the spring, but back then it was in the winter. So that's when I kind of, all the gymnastics coaches were at the state meet, so on and so forth. So I was very much an unknown until toward the end of that season. So why I chose Northern, you remember the gymnast I told you that I saw compete and motivated me?
Yeah.
As good as Nebraska was, because they were probably one of the top teams in the nation, there's no way I would have gone there because that guy went to Northern, and he had already, as a freshman in college, placed 8th in the nation at Division I, and so that's why I went on to there and went on to those other successes at Northern Illinois University.
Say again, Northern Illinois?
Northern Illinois University. I was a good gymnastics program.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Several national champions, actually a couple, myself and my teammate Mike Burke, several USA team members, and then we were probably by my senior year we were probably one of the top 11 teams in the nation.
All right, take us through some of the highlights and learning points that happened in college.
Well, just like anything else, it's always a learning experience. So I think my freshman year, surprisingly, I qualified to the nationals and placed, I think, 13th. And I was not real good in my compulsory that year, so my optional was, enough to get me at that place. It was an experience for me because I came into college still I was very much a late bloomer. In fact, I actually don't think I reached my physical peak until late 30s. I mean, I'm sorry, late 20s, just before 30, which is actually after my college career. So there was a gradual improvement that took place during my freshman year. And then sophomore year, I didn't make it to nationals. I actually hit the ring on my compulsory, and that was a little upsetting. My junior year, I took second, and I won the optionals. And the guy that actually won came from the school where the meet was held. So that was another motivating factor for me. I was not going to graduate college, at least my attitude was, because anything could happen. There's no guarantee. I don't care how much effort or dedication or grit one puts in a competitive sport. There is never a guarantee that you're going to end up in first place. So many things can happen. So many variables. So my thing was I was going to make sure as much as possible, put as many chips in my jar as possible, that I would not leave without that national championship my senior year. So that's kind of how my...
Does that mean in your event or the all-around?
No, I was not. I was more of I did compete all around, but gymnastics, my passion was in that event. So I was a national champion on that event.
Kirk on the rings.
Yeah.
So you graduate, and along the way, at that point, were there tryouts to go to the Olympics, things like that?
Well, that's an interesting question too. When I speak to athletes, a lot of times I get asked that. Well, if you won the national championships and all the Olympians compete collegiately in that same championship, how is it possible you didn't go to the Olympics? Well, gymnastics is a very unique sport in that the door is closed to specialists. It is only open to all around. Because of that, when I graduated college, that's as high as I can go. I would love to have had the opportunity. I watched a lot of them, and sometimes shaking my head at what I saw on these events. And I got to say, my teammate Mike Burke, who also won the national championship on pommel horse, which is a very difficult event. None of us were allowed access to that at that time. It's a little more flexible now, but at the cost of decreasing the numbers of members on the team. You're looking at only about 3 or 4 or 5 individuals out of the whole country. I wish the Olympics, and I think it's actually hurt the sport, was run more like it was at the college level, where you had 1 or 2 all around, and then the top 3 on every event, which would seem more logical, but that costs money.
Yeah, that's interesting, because if you go to the speed skating, there are people who do the short distances, medium and long, and you don't have to win all of those different distances. You can specialize. It's very interesting in gymnastics. The history is otherwise.
Yeah, it's all the events are it's locked up to you. So
when did you say goodbye to high-level gymnastics? How old, and what made you do that?
Well, I know a lot of people beyond college will start to enter open meets, and I did come back 3 years later and competed at a alumni meet for Northern. It's funny, my coach said, "You're better now than you were back at 3 years ago." Well, yeah, but again, that's because I was such a late bloomer. So, I mean, I was really a late bloomer. I mean, if you saw pictures of me in college, you would have thought I was a high school kid. I mean, I really was late. I don't think I had my first hair in my face until I graduated college. But anyway, without the Olympic dream as an available option, the only other option really is to get into your career. And since I always looked at, for me personally, gymnastics was a part of what I did, a big part, but it wasn't my identity. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. There are other avenues. So I could walk away, and what I wanted to do was get into teaching and coaching, because I had learned so much through the foundational building blocks that I put together to reach the level that I had reached in that short period of time. I wanted to teach other kids to do the same. And that's kind of how I looked at teaching and coaching. Just the idea that, man, if you guys only knew, there's so much more inner potential in you if you just only knew. So I brought that to my career as a physical educator and as a coach. So for me, it was more of an easier transition than maybe a lot of others who tend to, that's who I am, and now their identity's gone, and now who are they? For me, it was just a part of, a big part, an important part, but just a part of. There are other things for me in life to be successful at. So that's what was easier for me to shut that door and then move into my teaching and coaching. I really was a dedicated teacher and coach.
When you left your last high-level practice or event and you moved into the next day and the next week, did you go right into doing a fitness program?
Well, that's always been a big part of my life. Even when I was younger, I used to just run against the kids in the neighborhood just for fun. I mean, think about it. I'm 10 years old. I'm like, hey, let's go around the block. Let's run a mile and see who wins. You know, I mean, it was just me. So that just became part of me. My parents never worked out. And through my experience and education in college and through a little bit last year high school, to me, it just felt the right thing to do. It was very important. I mean, if you don't, to me, demonstrate a lot of caring for yourself, and to me, that's how you do that, then how can you care for other people? I mean, it comes from the inside first. So for me, I went right back in. I may have taken a month off, and then that would probably be about, I think there's only been a month at the most in my 62 years of life that I've really taken off some type of training. I should say maybe from high school on. So from high school on, I always did something. I just felt it was important. I used to try to encourage my father and my mother. My mother passed away from Alzheimer's, big smoker and drinker. And my father became a diabetic when he was, I think, 42. So he's 86 now. He's been a diabetic for 40 some odd years. I still attribute that to his lack of exercise and proper diet. I mean, not that he wouldn't have had that happen someday, but not at that age.
Yeah.
So it's been a big part of my life. So I just kind of moved in that direction because I thought it was important.
So if you look through my website, theagingathlete.com, Kirk, and you saw the statistic of the 90% or more than 90% of the athletes that I found. And what I do, as I mentioned, is I meet with somebody, whether it's at an event or I seek them out like I did with you. And then we have this conversation and I say, how are you still doing regular physical activity? They say yes or no. And I don't say, hitting to the gym once a day, performance, anything, just regular physical activity on a daily basis. And then I say, out of your group of 10 contacts, you still see on the news if they're a pro athlete, name it or something there, or you're on Facebook, or you see them at the events, or you're kind of more than 1,600 people, less than 10 said that group is higher than 10%. Less than 10 people have said that to me. So I'm still amazed at this. And when you sent you that statistic, had you thought of it in the way I put it before? And what did you make of that, Kirk?
I had an idea just by knowing kids and knowing people. I mean, when you work with, I think they estimated I taught like 13,500 kids in my career. So when you work with that many people and you get to know their parents, it's not just kids. You get to know their parents through that, some of that, and the coaching, and then watching my kids compete all the way up through Division I college sports. When you see those experiences, you get contacts with parents too. Many of them were athletes. So I had that concept, but probably not at that level. When you're saying 10%, I was, a little bit in shock. Because to me, it's a normal part of life. But I knew there was a high percentage that did not. I didn't know it was that high.
And you said in an email to me that out of the 20-some PE teachers that you worked with, colleagues, et cetera, that the number might be pretty low. Do you recall that number that you gave me?
There was probably about, and again, this is kind of off the top of my head, about 3 or 4 out of the 21 that spent what I would consider a regular time working out. To me, that means at least doing something 5 days a week, maybe 6. It depends on what level you're. I mean, if you're training intensely, there's going to have to be some recovery time there. But if you're just maintaining fitness, riding a bike, doing some aerobic stuff, push-ups, sit-ups, things of that nature, 5-6 days a week, I would say there's probably it was way less than half. I'm going to say maybe 3 or 4. And these are people that actually teach in the field.
They know all the benefits. They know all the techniques, and they just decide along the line that sedentism is the way for them. And they don't see it like you and I do as like a normal part of life, like flossing your teeth.
Exactly. And that's how I look at it. I remember I would go in because I coached. My normal day during my teaching and coaching career would be up by 4:30 or 5 at school, because I had all the facilities there to use that I needed. At there working out for an hour, whatever that workout is. Some are lighter, some are heavier days. I would get in the shower, get ready to teach by 7. I would start coaching at maybe 1, 2, or 3, depending on the year. Coach till 6 or 7, and go home, eat dinner, and go to bed, and do it all over again the next day. And I would be the only one. So I'd be in the morning. There was no other teachers in the morning. Some of them would work out after school or on their own, and I'm not sure what they did when they got home. But just knowing them during the heart of my career, there weren't a lot of them that did it like I did every day. It was just part of life, like you said, like flossing your teeth. And to me, people would say, well, I don't have time. Well, I don't have time either. That's why I got up at 4:30. And guess what? If I had to coach later or had to get up earlier, then I got to get up at 3:30. It's just a matter of where am I going to fit it? Priorities. It's a priority. It's going to fit somewhere.
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you, Wolf Weigo at UCSB, 3-time Olympian water polo, Stanford graduate. He's from Manhattan. And he told me very simply, he's a man of few words, but he packs a lot of punch, and you can feel how competitive this person is. When I asked him about, like I said, if your neighbor got a ping pong table or a foosball and you weren't very good at it, would you have to keep working at it until you could beat everybody? He goes, exactly. He said, that's the way I'm wired. So I said, so you're like a 9 or a 9.5 on a 1 to 10 scale in competition? He said, no, I'm a 10. And he said, it's just how he's wired. He wasn't being braggadocious in any way. It's just how he's wired. So I said, what's the key for this wellness thing? And he's got he coaches the boys team and the girls team. That's a pretty rigorous schedule.
Oh, yeah.
He's got two kids.
He's a busy guy.
Busy guy. And he said, when I'm in the pool playing with my kids, I run around with them in the pool. When I go upstairs, I pick one or two of them up and I run up the stairs and I run down. If I have the energy, I'll do it 4 times. And that's like play and a workout all in one. And so he said, what you have to do with life is wellness has to be one of your 3 main things you emphasize. It has to be one of your 3 main. You're going to have tons of priorities. But if one of your 3 main ones isn't wellness, he said, you've already lost the wellness battle, and there you are. You're going to suffer through those mind, body, and spirit things on a regular basis. And I would say your chance of not suffering is less than 1%. Would you agree with that, Kirk?
100%. I agree with exactly what you're saying. It's probably what helps keep me going is that piece. And I think a lot of it has to do with purpose. You know, I have a purpose. And part of my purpose as a PE teacher was to set a good example. It's the same thing I did as a coach. How can I stand in front of kids and insist that, look, this is important for your life. The quality and quantity of the life that you will lead beyond high school is going to be attributed to partly of this piece. How can I stand in front of them and tell them that and not do the same? It's hypocritical. It's like a doctor who's telling you to quit smoking as he puts out his cigarette in his ashtray. To me, that's ridiculous. I'd like to highlight something that you mentioned about that one coach. I'm kind of wired that way too. I am very competitive, and I think you'd find a lot of high-level athletes tend to carry what's I would term type of an OCD type of perfectionistic personality as you look at them and what that allows them to do, and I was definitely part of this. It allows them to repeat behavior over and over and over to master whatever it is that they're trying to do for them and for me. And that's the same thing with table tennis or anything I did, tennis or any activity. It wasn't necessarily for me beating the competition. It was, how good can I get? So to give you an idea of how that worked for me in college, I would work so long that my coach wouldn't stay with me any longer in college. Now, this is a Division I sports program. So he actually had a key for me for the gym and gave me the key so I could lock up when I left. And every day through my whole college career, I was the last one in the gym. I turned on the music. I put an extra hour in to reach the mini goals I had set for that day. And guess what? Kirk didn't leave until those were met. I just didn't leave. So I'm kind of wired that way. What I might be a little different than some of them is I move into different projects and I try to balance my life because of my idea about purpose and physical activity. Like I don't train that way anymore. I think I may have mentioned that to you. I mean, that type of intense training is not needed to stay healthy. So the purpose has changed, but the attitude is still the same of having to do this. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. You and I think we have like the same frequency because I have a comfort level, like I'm talking to me that's read different books and has had a different life. I really feel, like this connection with the intelligence and the experiential sides of our lives and our intentions, right? And I'll put my hand up right now and say I would like to go get coaching for the next 3 months and work on some things that I've been unable to accomplish on my own. It's like getting a transformation with the gifts of somebody else, right? I can help a lot of people, but there's some things I definitely have been unable to accomplish on my own. And at 57, they're still on my to-do list. Do you have anything like that?
Well, I'm a little bit different in my career at this point because in my life, the things I was unable to do was do a lot of traveling and get experiences outside of the country.
Yeah.
We raised our 2 daughters on pretty much a single income teacher's salary. So we didn't have I valued their sports experiences, the intrinsic part, at such a high level. I was willing to sacrifice those things to give them those experiences. And from my perspective for them, looking at their lives now, I mean, one's 34 with their first child, one is 30, and what they're doing and how they're applying the same intrinsic principles, it's worked out for me. Looking at them and how successful they are in what they do, they're using those intrinsic principles. So for my life, I'm kind of stepping back a little bit now, and not the fitness part. That's still a big part of my life, but trying to experience traveling. I had never been to Las Vegas. I'd never been to Bar Harbor, Maine. I'd never been to Italy, and I'm half Italian. And those are things so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to read a lot, and I'm trying to experience things that a lot of people did when they were younger, raising kids. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Got it. One last question before we wind down. I've heard this story, and I've been part of this in terms of the team sport, even golf. The team I mainly did in high school, besides football, the golf team, we had to do the same routines, and but it didn't get repetitive because once we were done with the routine, we're off on our own for 2 or 3 hours. Where in football, you read about some of these great athletes, Deion Sanders. In football, you have Marcus Dupree, who some consider the greatest running back ever, who got injured early on. And, they said he was like a Jim Brown as a high school athlete playing against high school kids. Nobody could touch him. And when these people went to the very rigorous, Bo Jackson had the same thing. When they went to college and they stepped into these programs where it was the team ethic, where you might have had two sessions a day, with, in college, you could have 8 coaches breathing down your neck, and then a few therapist type people as well, and maybe some team managers running around with clipboards. So it's very regimented. And the documentary on Marcus Dupree, which is called The Greatest That Never Was, it talks about him not wanting to do the regular practice at Oklahoma some of the time. And so the coach walked over to him, and the assistant coach started giving him some grief. And Marcus, being able to bench over 400 pounds back in the early 80s, wow, had a basketball in his hand, and he wouldn't listen to the coach. And so the coach grabbed the basketball with 2 hands, and Marcus had it with 1 hand. And Marcus just kept going like this, and the coach with 2 hands couldn't pull it out of his hand. So it showed you the strength, but it also showed you that this person said, look, I'm different. I don't want to be on the same regimen because you're going to burn me out. And I'm a different type of an animal. I'm like a Picasso, where Picasso, if you put him in a 20-year program with a teacher breathing down his neck, it might not have worked. But if you gave him the learning and then you set him with some structure on his own path, he would be a high performance person. Have you run across this with your own self in the regimented thing? And then if you did, share that, and also share as a coach how you handled some of the more gifted people who didn't work well within the regimented structure.
That's a good question. I'd say for me, I was lucky to have the opportunity with both of my coaches, both in high school and college, because I tend to be a very independent person. I like doing my own research and my own thing. So if you think of the story I just told about my college coach giving me the key and he never breathed over me, or I was free or freer than maybe some athletes experienced to do kind of what I felt I needed. And that tended to be more than what other people did. That's not to say that that's the only way it can be done, but for me, that worked. Same thing in high school. If you remember the story I told you about the high school coach, I really was on my own at the club where I worked out. That's another thing. I had to do my own research and try to learn as I went. And I kind of coached myself through high school. And then in college, I had a very good coach technically, but he still let me do the things that I felt I had to do enough to reach the level and mastery that I wanted to. There was really never an issue with that. As far as a coach, I coached at the high school level. And so I had a variety of talented athletes. I had 2 athletes that eventually went on to compete collegiately on scholarship. Some of that credit goes to the club where I worked, and the training that they got there, all the way to people that, worked on a JV level in high school and freshman level. So I can't really say that I ever had an athlete that I had that was at a talent level or a type of person that wouldn't put the time in that I expected of them. So I never faced that. It was maybe it's the sport, I don't know. I again, my perspective comes from the idea that I didn't necessarily compete just to win. That was an outcome. My perspective came from the attitude is, how well can I do this? Okay, I've done it that well. Now what's next? So I was constantly climbing a ladder, which took a lot of time and repetition. So I kind of come from that frame of reference. So I can't really say I experienced any athlete that would have not done what I asked them to do.
Yeah, there was a high school athlete, and my best friend in New Jersey, his dad's generation, back in the '60s, that was a pitcher who was sort of a mind pitcher. He had the physique and the talent, but what he would do is he would get it into his mind that he was going to throw a no-hitter. And, he'd come close to doing that when he was in that mindset. And the coach, the old school coach, said, hey, you got to do X, Y, and Z in practice, and you got to do this in your school and this type of thing. And he'd find this kid out on the bleachers instead of coming to practice, occasionally the day before the game. And he said, what are you doing? He goes, Coach, I'm putting it in my mind. I'm visualizing. This is the '60s, before a lot of people were talking about visualization. He goes, Coach, if you don't bug me, I'm going to guarantee you that I'm going to come close to throwing a no-hitter tomorrow. And finally, when he was able to do this stuff, the coach let him off the hook. But a lot of coaches would have thrown him off the team and missed. They both would have missed out on this guy's special talent.
See, when you tell that story to me as an athlete, my perspective on that would be to follow what the coach wanted me, and then I spend my own time doing the visualization on my own.
Separately.
Yes, that's because it's a very fine line when you start, especially in the world we live in now. When you have expectations of your athletes, how do you justify for the other athletes that you're coaching that this person gets special treatment? Because what you start to see is the attitude, well, it's because he's good and he wins that he's allowed to do that. I can't do that, so he gets favoritism. And I tried to balance, be very fair and equitable to all kids. Now, how that might work is, let's say I asked an athlete to do 5 of these at this certain level. It might take that athlete that's very talented 5 minutes to do that. It might take the less talented athlete an hour to do the same 5 reps. But from the coaches to the athlete's perspective, I'm being equitable. Here's the expectation. How are you going to meet it? Oh, you did it? Okay, go ahead, you're done. Oh, you haven't? You can't leave until you're done. So that's kind of how I presented it. It wasn't, because otherwise, like I said, it'd be very difficult to justify that to members. How do you build that team camaraderie? How do you build that we're all in this together attitude if certain people are allowed to do whatever it is that they want, but not anybody else? So that's an issue that you have to look at.
Yeah, I was looking at these people. Sometimes they're rebels with a cause, and they're wired differently, and you can diffuse their energy from doing a 2 or 3 hour practice. And in football, I would imagine in the '60s and '70s, and when I was in college, I graduated in '85. I think there was a lot of hard hitting, even at the college level, at that time. And nowadays, even in MMA, the coach that I interviewed up at the Pit MMA in San Luis Obispo, he said he doesn't allow his MMA fighters to do live sparring. He said they're doing drills all the time. He doesn't want any of them to have facial damage and have to worry about that stuff or get rocked in the head a bunch of times and have the brain disorder. What's the acronym for the brain disorder?
I can't remember now, but it's really, I can't remember what that is now. Because I've read a lot about it, but it's been a while. It's not been in the news lately.
Yeah, what's the what is the? It's okay. The C for concussion is in that one. So there's a CLS concussion something. Maybe it's CLS. But anyway, he doesn't want his boxers having to face any of that. But when you're hitting the mitts over and over with him pushing you back, they're ready for the fight from doing that. They don't need to be able to work on taking a punch. that's a whole different philosophy. But you talk to somebody back in the day about live sparring and football and contact, they would be saying, let's go hard frequently. And I think a lot of people in the old days in football, in like a college team, must have gotten hurt in practice as much as they did in the games.
Probably. Yeah, I could see that. Well, my practice is typically with and again, I was a head girls coach, would be to try to make them more intense than the competition. I was very much into that. I think the soccer coach out at North Carolina, I can't remember his name right now, but he works his athletes that way. It's very competitive in the gym. And for them, the advantage of that, from my perspective, is that when you get to the competition, the stress level for you drops. You know what I mean? You don't have to play the mental games because you've already been there. It's harder in practice. So,
yeah. So the big reach out, if you could keep this in your mind with the people you bump into, Kirk, is that I'm looking for an organization that's a collegiate or a health industry, sports industry organization that might have somebody doing research projects or getting their PhD that would be able to put a small team together and go at the study that I've done in between anecdotal and scientific and do like an official study where we talk to athletes, and maybe it's part of this university's research grant that they seek out, so we can follow up with these athletes every several years, and then we can have retreats and webinars and all these things to empower the former high school, college, and pro athletes to maintain their health and wellness through having a daily program of honoring their mind, body, and spirit. So that's something I'm reaching out for.
I will keep that in mind. I am not aware of any at this point. Personally, I don't think there's enough emphasis on that particular topic, not only just for athletes, but for everybody. I mean, look at physical education. There's no state in the union left, except maybe Illinois, that has mandatory 4-year PE. So they're removing the emphasis on that, which is really kind of sad. Even if you look at this COVID-19 I have some research material that I've read recently about the advantages of being in good physical condition for your immune system with regard to COVID-19. So, I mean, it's just such an important aspect. And it's bothersome to me a little bit, especially with my profession, to see people put such a low priority on it, because it's so important. It goes back to those 3 things that you said. And if you're missing this one, then what does the other 2 matter, right?
Got it. So you shared a quote. It says, what one believes determines how one thinks. How one thinks determines the actions one takes. And it is those actions that create the opportunity for what one can accomplish and where one's destiny might lie. And they are all connected. So that's probably a good place to wind down this particular interview. And we'll ask the people to give us a thumbs up, a like, and to take a look at your book online, Kirk Mango, and say the name and Amazon as well.
Yeah, it's Becoming a True Champion, Achieving Athletic Excellence from the Inside Out. And that subtitle is really important to the book.
Very important. And I'm Sifu Slim at theagingathlete.com. And please leave your honorable and respectful comments down below. Please like, and we'll come back to you more when we've got another great interview to share. Thanks, Kirk.
Sure. Thank you.